I stood there frozen, the funeral lilies still clinging to my coat as I unfolded the will with shaking hands. One line cut sharper than grief itself. Do not enter or alter the property at Black Elm Road, the farm, the place my husband swore I must never go. After 24 years of marriage, after every promise I kept, after every silence I swallowed, he left me a secret so heavy it followed me out of the church and into the dark Kentucky back roads. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. The church smelled like lilies and old wood polish, suffocating in a way Nora hadn't expected. The stained glass filtered afternoon sunlight into fractured colors on the floor, bleeding across the pews like bruises. She sat perfectly still, spine straight, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her black dress was too warm for September in Lexington, but grief made her cold. Hank's photo rested on an easel at the altar. That same smirk she had fallen in love with at 22. Confident, solid, lying. Around her, murmurs drifted like smoke. He was such a good man. So devoted to Nora. He'd do anything for her. She smiled politely when someone touched her shoulder, nodded when they whispered, "You were lucky to have him." Lucky. The service ended with a hymn Hank had once claimed he hated. Nora stood through it anyway. The pastor spoke about peace and eternity and the dignity of a quiet life. Nora barely heard a word. Her eyes stayed on the casket, closed, oak, and final. Later, at the graveside, a breeze lifted the hem of her coat as she watched them lower him down. Dust rose. A memory stirred. Hank's voice, crisp and warning. "Never go to that damn farm, Nora. Promise me." She hadn't asked why. She never did. Back at the house, hers alone now, Joel Brennan stood in the living room, briefcase in hand. "I know it's early," he said, "but you should see this." Nora took the will from him with fingers that didn't quite feel attached to her body. She read it once, then again slower. Paragraphs about property and retirement accounts. Provisions for nieces she hadn't seen in years. Then, one line, buried in the center. Nora is to inherit the Lexington residence and all bank holdings. She is not, under any circumstance, to enter or alter the property at Black Elm Road. She looked up slowly. "The farm?" Joel nodded, his brow furrowed. "It's legally enforceable, though a little odd. Vague but binding. He made sure this clause stayed in through every revision." Nora stared down at the page. Black Elm Road. A place Hank never discussed. A place he said was just land and not worth the drive. A place she was now explicitly banned from even in death. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than she expected. "Do you know why?" Joel shook his head. "Honestly, I don't. He was private about it. Always." The silence stretched between them like a wire. After he left, Nora went to the foyer and stood at the key rack, Hank's brass organizer with labels etched in his tidy print. House, shed, safety deposit, truck, and one she'd never noticed before. The tag was faded, but the words were still legible. Black Elm Road. It was heavier than the others, cold in her palm. She didn't pack a bag, didn't change her clothes. She just slipped the key into her coat pocket, grabbed her purse, and walked out before she could talk herself out of it. The drive stretched past town and into the sprawl of southern Kentucky, fields giving way to narrow roads bordered by old fencing and rusted-out silos. She passed a shuttered feed store and an abandoned gas station where a plastic flag still flapped in the wind. Black Elm Road was unmarked. She nearly missed it. Just a dirt cut-through off-county line. She turned in slowly, tires crunching over gravel and dry leaves. The farmhouse emerged like something preserved in amber. 2 stories, pale siding, windows shuttered. A porch swing creaked slightly in the wind. Everything was too still, too kept. Nora parked, killed the engine, and just sat there. Her hands stayed on the wheel. Her breath came shallow. Why this place? Why the secrecy? Why now? She got out, walked slowly to the front door, inserted the key. It turned without resistance. The smell hit her first. Dust, old wood, something faintly herbal. Inside, the house was intact. Not abandoned, not decaying. Just waiting. Furniture covered in sheets. A pair of boots by the back door. A coat still on a hook. And on the hallway wall, a framed picture she had never seen before. A young girl, no older than 16, with Hank's eyes and a smile that didn't belong to Nora. Her stomach lurched. Somewhere deeper in the house, something creaked. Not the wind. Not the house settling. A footstep. She wasn't alone. The footstep had vanished. Nora stood frozen in the hallway, barely breathing. Her pulse throbbed behind her eyes. A single beam of late sun cut across the floorboards, catching dust in slow motion. She turned toward the sound, expecting, what? An intruder? A squatter? A ghost? But the house held still. No voices, no movement. Just the gentle, eerie sway of the porch swing outside and the hollow creak of old wood settling around her. Still, she reached into her coat pocket and wrapped her hand around the old key like a talisman. If someone was here, they weren't announcing themselves. She moved deeper inside. The floor groaned beneath her weight. Time hadn't claimed the farmhouse like she expected. It didn't smell of mold or rot, no broken windows, no nests in the corners. The air felt stale but strangely clean, as if someone had been here, maybe yesterday, maybe this morning. She stepped into what must have been the living room, a blanket draped over a worn recliner, not dusty, not covered. A plastic jug of water sat beside it, capped and half full. An opened pack of crackers on a tray table. A spoon in a bowl that hadn't been rinsed. The scene was still, too still, but undeniably recent. Nora reached out and touched the chair's arm. It was warm. Her stomach twisted. Someone had been here. Recently. Maybe minutes ago. She turned toward the fireplace. The mantel was cluttered with small, intimate debris. An empty photo frame, a dusty snow globe from Gatlinburg, a cracked ceramic mug with "Best Dad Ever" faded on the side, and a photograph. A girl again. This time a few years older than the first photo in the hallway. 17, maybe 18. Long, sun-streaked hair pulled into a loose ponytail, arms wrapped around a golden retriever. She was barefoot in what looked like the backyard of this very farmhouse. The same wide porch steps, the same peeling paint on the railings, and the smile again. Familiar, but not hers. Hank's blood. Nora's hand shook as she set the photo down. She didn't know this girl, didn't know this place. Not really. But Hank had. Deeply. Secretly. She stepped into the kitchen. A simple space. Linoleum floor. Avocado-colored fridge. Cabinets that looked original to the 60s. There were dishes in the drying rack. Fresh. A sponge that hadn't dried out. Her eyes moved to the pantry door. Something about it felt off. Not just closed. Guarded. She opened it slowly. Rows of supplies greeted her. Canned goods stacked neatly by type, paper towels, boxed crackers, vitamins, pet food. Everything organized, everything current. She reached for a tin of soup. The expiration date was next year. This place wasn't abandoned. It was maintained, stocked, lived in. And yet no sound now. No signs of anyone else moving. Whoever had been here, if they hadn't slipped out already, was very, very quiet. She turned and caught sight of something small, folded neatly over the back of a wooden chair. A woman's sweater, light blue, worn soft. Nora stared at it like it might move on its own. There was something too intimate about it. Not thrown or forgotten, placed. Like the wearer planned to return. Like she lived here. Like Hank had made sure she could. A gust of wind pushed through the eaves, and the back screen door clattered somewhere. Nora startled, her nerves coiled tight now. She backed into the hallway, her hand brushing the doorframe to steady herself. In the quiet, she could hear her own breath, and something else. A soft click, like a latch. From upstairs. She looked up the staircase. The shadows were deepening fast, the light behind her draining into twilight. Was someone still here? Nora placed one hand on the railing, her heart hammering so loud she swore it echoed. The house watched her. Waited. Then she heard it. Distinct this time. A door upstairs closed. Gently. Deliberately. Nora turned sharply, fast enough that her heel caught on the rug beneath her, nearly sending her stumbling back into the wall. "Hello?" Her voice cracked on the second syllable. Silence answered. The door upstairs hadn't opened again. No one stepped out of the shadows. But something had changed. The house no longer felt simply eerie. It felt inhabited. Like it had swallowed someone whole, leaving only the tension behind. She backed down the hallway, not running but not steady either, one hand skimming the old wallpaper for balance. Outside, the air slapped her with its cool, damp bite. Somewhere in the tree line, a cicada buzzed like a faulty wire. Dusk had settled in, draping the sky in a bruised purple. And then she saw them. Tire tracks. Deep, fresh grooves in the muddy driveway, not yet dried or smoothed by wind. Whoever had been here hadn't used the front path. They'd come around the back, quietly. Left while she was inside. Maybe while she was in the pantry. She turned, scanning the distance. Nothing moved beyond the fence line. No engine growl, no brake lights in the distance. Just the weight of a secret that hadn't quite slipped away. Nora headed straight for Hank's old truck. She hadn't touched it since he died. The inside still smelled like his cologne. Sharp, piney, a bit too strong. The glove box gave way with a metallic sigh. Receipts, napkins, a rusted flashlight, and one small brass key on a leather fob. The tag was cracked but legible. Ellie, Route 5 mailbox. Nora stared at it. The name didn't mean anything yet, but the key was real. The kind Hank wouldn't just toss around. She put it in her coat pocket and started the truck. The engine rumbled to life after a moment's protest. If someone had just left the farmhouse, they were likely local. Close enough to be keeping watch. Close enough to know she wasn't supposed to be there. She drove until she hit pavement again, then followed the signs toward town. Lexington fading into its outlying bones. It took her 10 minutes to spot the diner, a low-slung building with flickering red neon that read, "Lou's Place." A rusted sign advertised hot pies and full breakfasts. Inside, it was warm, fluorescent, the kind of place where people knew each other's coffee orders and the jukebox hadn't worked in decades. She slid into a booth near the window. A waitress approached. Late 30s, maybe. Auburn ponytail, tired eyes, hands that moved like they'd wiped 1,000 counters. Her name tag read, Ellie. "Coffee?" Ellie asked, already reaching for the pot. Nora nodded. "Black." Ellie poured without looking too long at her. Nora kept her voice light. "I passed an old farmhouse on Black Elm Road earlier. Place looked oddly well kept." Ellie froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Nora to notice. Then she straightened up and walked away without a word. Not even a refill offer. Nora watched her retreat behind the counter, set the pot down too hard, then say something under her breath to a cook in the back. The man barely glanced up. She waited. Let the silence stretch. Ellie came back a minute later, wiping her hands on a towel that didn't need wiping. "You new to town?" she asked without smiling. Nora took a sip of the coffee. Burnt. Bitter. "Widowed," she said simply. Ellie's eyes darkened. "Sorry to hear." Nora nodded toward the window. "That farm. My husband used to own it. Never let me near the place." Ellie's jaw set. "Then maybe you ought to keep it that way." The words hit sharper than expected. Controlled. Not rude. Pointed. Nora met her gaze. "That place is part of my life now. I have a right to ask." Ellie leaned closer, dropping her voice. "That place was Hank's business. Not yours." Nora stared back, pulse tightening. "He's dead. And you're still not invited." Before Nora could respond, Ellie walked off again, this time toward the back hallway that led to the kitchen. She didn't look back. Nora turned slightly in her seat, pretending to reach for her purse. Her eyes caught it, just before the door swung closed. A young man standing in the hallway, watching her. He looked exactly like Hank. The headlights cut a narrow path through the black Kentucky night, bouncing off tree trunks and the reflective glint of distant eyes. Nora gripped the wheel tighter, jaw set, eyes scanning for deer, or anything else that didn't belong. The old truck rattled over gravel as she turned onto Black Elm Road again. This time, no hesitation. She parked closer to the porch, engine ticking as it cooled. The house stood dark. No porch light. No sound. Just the rustle of leaves in the wind and a silence that felt expectant. Nora stepped out. The sweater from earlier was still draped over the chair inside. The pantry door still ajar. No new tire tracks in the dirt. But something had shifted, like the house had exhaled while she was gone. She moved through the kitchen and into the front room. The fireplace now cold. The photo of the girl still on the mantel, still watching. She didn't go upstairs. Not yet. Instead, she drifted toward Hank's old writing desk in the corner. Antique, heavy, with a drawer she remembered once being padlocked. The lock was gone now. Just a tarnished ring of metal, snapped and loose in the drawer groove. Inside, she found an envelope, sealed in red wax, not labeled with her name, but with 6 simple, chilling words: "To be opened if I die." Nora sat down slowly. The chair creaked under her weight. She ran a finger across the wax, then broke the seal. The paper inside was yellowed slightly at the edges. But the handwriting was unmistakably Hank's. Confident, tight loops, pressure heavy like he was always trying to make a point. "Nora, if you're reading this, then I failed to explain the things I should have said when I was alive. Maybe I was a coward. Maybe I thought I was protecting you. I never meant to hurt you. I had to take care of them. You'll understand in time. Hank." She read it again, then again. Each time, the same thing snagged. Them. Not her. Not him. Them. Nora sat frozen for a moment, heart rattling. She placed the letter gently on the desk and opened the next drawer. Inside, a spiral notebook. The cover frayed, pages slightly warped from age and use. It smelled like dust and something faintly medicinal. She opened it. Dates scribbled along the margins. Lines of expenses. Grocery store names. Numbers and hash marks. Socks X3. Gasoline. OTC cold meds. Then one entry circled twice. Milk, meds, Caleb's boots. Caleb. Not a name she recognized. Not from Hank's side of the family. Not from hers. She flipped through the rest of the notebook. The name appeared again and again. Always near winter months. Always paired with something practical. Jacket. Caleb. Eye apt. Caleb. New tires before snow. Caleb riding shotgun. Nora closed the book. Her fingers tingled like the blood had been pulled from them. Who was Caleb? More importantly, why had Hank been caring for him, in secret, for years? She stood and walked to the hallway closet, pushed aside a few coats. Nothing unusual. Then she noticed the small trapdoor on the floor, one she hadn't remembered seeing before. It was flush with the boards, almost invisible. She knelt and pulled it open. A box rested inside, wrapped in an old quilt. She lifted it out and carried it to the coffee table. The lid stuck for a moment, then gave. Inside were stacks of cash. Dozens of envelopes, all labeled in Hank's handwriting. Some read food, others medical, auto, Caleb, and one, written more recently, if Ellie calls, don't answer. Nora's breath hitched. She wasn't just being kept in the dark, she was being kept out. And if Ellie was calling now, then someone knew she had opened the door. Hank swore she never should. A car door slammed outside. Nora stood fast. She moved to the window and pulled the curtain back an inch. Headlights, low and off, parked just beyond the tree line. Someone was watching the house. Nora barely slept. She sat in the armchair by her bedroom window, wrapped in a knit blanket and the weight of 1,000 questions. The headlights in the trees had disappeared sometime before dawn. No movement, no knock, just silence, like someone wanted her to know they were watching, and nothing more. By morning, the light cut pale and uncertain through the farmhouse curtains. She didn't bother making coffee. She drove straight into town, her hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough to leave imprints. Her phone buzzed twice in her purse, but she didn't check. She already knew who it was. Joel Brennan opened his office door before she knocked. "You look like hell," he said quietly, ushering her inside. "I'm not here for small talk." Her voice was hoarse. "I need to know everything Hank ever kept from me about that farm." Joel gestured toward a seat but didn't press when she remained standing. He moved to a file cabinet and pulled a manila folder from the bottom drawer. "I went back through some archived records after you left. Something about that clause in the will. It stuck with me." He laid the folder flat on the desk and opened it. Hank purchased the Black Elm property in 2003. Paid in cash. It was filed under a different legal entity, a shell trust, but eventually it ties back to him. Nora crossed her arms. "That part I expected. What don't I know?" Joel hesitated. Then he flipped to the second page and pointed. "Co-ownership." There, typed in black ink, was a name she had never heard before. Mariah DeWitt Campbell. Nora stared at it, heart dropping like a trapdoor had opened beneath her. "Campbell," she whispered. Joel nodded slowly. "Same last name. That's not a clerical error." Nora sat down hard. "You're telling me—" Her mouth went dry. "He married someone else?" Joel didn't look at her. "The records are muddy. There's no license filed in Fayette County. But in a neighboring district, Pulaski, there's a marriage registration from 2001. Witness signatures, no divorce, no annulment. No court proceedings of any kind. It's like both marriages just existed." Nora blinked. Her brain couldn't hold it all. "That's not possible. That's... what? Bigamy?" "It should be," Joel said. "But legally, it's buried. Either he had help, or no one ever checked. He kept everything separate. No joint bank accounts, no crossover of documents, not even an insurance beneficiary change." Nora's mouth went tight. "He planned it." Joel looked up at her now, eyes serious. "He did." She felt like she'd swallowed glass. All those years she'd spent thinking Hank was just secretive, just old-fashioned. The shed he didn't want her in. The long drives. The Saturdays he claimed were for hardware runs. And all this time, he had another wife. Nora drew a slow breath. What happened to her? Joel flipped one last page. Mariah DeWitt Campbell. Died 3 years ago. Local hospice record says it was ovarian cancer. She passed at home. "At the farm?" Nora asked. He nodded. "Looks like it." Nora leaned forward, pressing her fingers to her temples. So I was, what, the other woman? I don't think either of you knew, Joel said. Legally, you're his wife. All documentation on file here in Lexington backs that, but that doesn't make it right. Her eyes burned, but she didn't let the tears come. Not here. Not now. Instead, she looked at the folder again. At the name. Mariah. The name felt foreign in her mouth, like something stolen from a different life and shoved into hers. Joel hesitated before closing the folder. There's more. Nora lifted her eyes. Joel's voice lowered. When she died, Hank had her cremated. No obituary, no funeral. There's no official next of kin listed, only the signature of the person who claimed the remains. He turned the page to show her. It was Hank's signature. Nora's stomach twisted. He hadn't just hidden this woman, he had erased her. And if Caleb was part of that life, if Caleb was hers, then nothing Nora believed about her own marriage was intact. Joel leaned back. I'll keep digging, quietly. Nora stood, too fast. Her knees wobbled. Don't, she said. Joel looked up, puzzled. Nora, I'm going to the high school. He frowned. Why? She turned to the door. Because if Caleb isn't just some kid, I need to know who raised him. The farmhouse was silent again by the time Nora returned. No headlights in the trees this time, no sound outside, but the brittle scratch of leaves tumbling along the porch. The wind had shifted. Cooler now, less forgiving. She moved through the house with purpose. No more drifting. No more waiting to feel ready. She opened drawers, sifted through cupboards, turned over baskets and paper stacks until she found what she didn't know she was looking for. It was tucked between an old grocery flyer and a yellowing insurance bill on the kitchen counter, a folded envelope from Kentucky Utilities. To Caleb DeWitt, Black Elm Road, Lexington, KY. Her breath caught. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. The statement was recent, only 4 months old. Paid in full. She stared at the name, DeWitt. Mariah's last name, Caleb. It wasn't just Hank's secret anymore. It was a life, fully lived, tethered to this place by receipts, paperwork, and a surname she never shared. She got back in the truck. This time, she knew exactly where to go. The high school sat on the edge of town, a squat brick building with a faded American flag tugging at the sky and yellow buses lined up like cattle at a chute. She parked near the visitor entrance and walked inside, smoothing her coat as she passed the front office's plexiglass divider. A receptionist glanced up. Can I help you? I need to ask about a former student, Nora said. Caleb DeWitt. The woman hesitated. We don't normally release that kind of... I'm family, Nora cut in. Or I might be. I'm trying to find out. The woman stared at her a moment longer, then sighed. 1 sec. A few minutes later, the principal emerged from the hallway, a lean man in his 50s, with silver at his temples and a deeply lined forehead that said he'd seen too many parent-teacher meetings in his lifetime. I'm Jim Grady, he said. You said Caleb DeWitt? Yes. He nodded slowly. Graduated 2 years ago. Smart kid. Quiet. Good with his hands. Do you have his records? Grady hesitated, then motioned toward his office. This way. Inside, he pulled a slim folder from a drawer and set it on the desk. I shouldn't really show you this without proper release, he said. But if you're telling me you're connected to him... I think I am, Nora said. Please. He opened the file and pointed to a line on the intake sheet. Guardian, Henry Campbell. Relationship. Uncle Nora stared. Did he live with him? She asked. For most of his high school years, yeah. Came in as a transfer sophomore. No mention of his mother. Father listed as deceased. Grady flipped the page and slid it toward her. A laminated copy of Caleb's student ID was stapled to the back. The photo stopped her breath. It wasn't just that he looked like Hank. It was how much. Jawline, brow, that same tired but proud stare. The kind of face that kept things locked away. My God, she whispered. Grady watched her carefully. You all right? No, Nora said honestly. But thank you. She didn't drive home. She drove to the diner. Lou's place looked the same. Same flickering sign, same cluster of regulars at the window booths. Ellie wasn't on the floor. A different waitress brought her coffee. Nora didn't ask questions. She just waited. 20 minutes passed. Then Ellie emerged from the back carrying a tray of refills. The moment she saw Nora, her body tensed like a taut wire. She pivoted, dumped the tray at another table, and slipped back into the kitchen without even looking her way. Nora didn't follow. She paid in cash and stepped outside into the dim, late afternoon light. The sky was slate-colored, bruising toward storm. She turned toward her truck and froze. Across the street, leaning against a rusted blue pickup, stood a young man in a black hoodie. He wasn't moving, just watching. Not casually, deliberately. Their eyes met, and it was like looking 30 years into the past. Hank's face, reborn in bone and blood and youth. Nora's knees nearly buckled. Caleb. He didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't come closer. He just turned, climbed into his truck, and drove away. Nora didn't go home. She waited until Caleb's rusted pickup disappeared around the corner, then threw the truck into gear and followed, keeping 2 lengths behind. She killed her headlights once he hit the outskirts. Less traffic, fewer eyes. The roads were familiar but empty, winding into the belly of Lexington's industrial strip. Old brick warehouses, rusted signage, chain-link fences. He pulled into a narrow lot behind a squat building with a fading blue awning. Turner's Auto and Transmission. The lights inside flickered, fluorescent and tired. A garage door was half open. Caleb parked out back, grabbed a backpack from the passenger seat, and headed inside. Nora parked across the street. Her fingers clutched the steering wheel long after the engine died. She wasn't ready, but she was already here. The bell above the office door jingled as she stepped inside. It smelled of oil, rubber, and sweat. A radio murmured low from the back, some twangy country ballad about broken things. Caleb stood behind the counter, wiping grease from his hands with a red shop rag. His expression didn't shift. I figured you'd follow me, he said. His voice, lower than she expected, calm, hit her harder than she was prepared for. It was Hank's timbre, softened by youth. I didn't mean to scare you, she said carefully. I needed to see you. Caleb tossed the rag aside. You've seen me now. Nora stepped closer, keeping her tone steady. You're Caleb DeWitt. I know who I am, he said. She hesitated. And I'm Nora, Hank's wife. He nodded once. Yeah, I know who you are too. Something about that burned. She searched his face. Was he your father? Caleb's mouth twitched. Not a smile, almost a grimace. That's what he said, he replied. Didn't need a test or anything. He just told me one day. Said I looked like him. Said I'd understand when I was older. And your mother? Nora asked. He didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, taut and full of things neither of them could name. I didn't know about you, she said softly. Not ever. Not until a few days ago. He looked away, jaw tightening. He said I wasn't supposed to contact you. Ever. Why? Caleb shrugged. Said it'd only hurt you, that it would mess up your life. Guess it still might. Nora stepped closer, voice breaking. You're not some mistake. You're not some stain he had to keep buried. You're not yours. Caleb cut in. That's what Ellie says. Nora flinched at the name. Caleb leaned against the counter, arms crossed. He didn't live with us. Not full-time. He paid for everything. Rent, food, meds, school stuff, even the dog. Came by once a week, sometimes less. We'd go to the diner, he'd check in. Hand me cash, give me books. Talk about tools, mostly. Trucks, never much else. Did you want more? Nora asked. Caleb looked at her then, really looked at her, and something flickered in his eyes. I wanted a dad, he said simply, but I settled for Hank. Nora's heart cracked at the edges. Would you ever want to talk again? I could get us some coffee, just to talk. He shook his head. I'm good. And then, the office door slammed open behind them. Ellie stormed in, apron still on, eyes blazing. What the hell do you think you're doing? She hissed. Nora turned. This isn't your business. He is my business, Ellie snapped. You don't get to waltz in here with your widow act and poke around like you own this town. You had your life. Let him keep his. Caleb said nothing. He just stared down at the grease on his hands. Nora stepped forward. He has a right to know me, to decide for himself. Ellie's voice dropped low, dangerous. You don't belong here, Nora. Go back to your pretty little house and pretend your husband wasn't a liar. Nora didn't flinch. He's our husband, apparently. The words cut the air clean. Ellie went still. Then, without a word, she turned to Caleb. You coming or not? Caleb looked between them, two women bound by a man neither truly knew. I need to close up, he said finally, alone. Ellie hesitated, then left without another word. Nora watched her go, then turned back to Caleb. But he was already walking into the garage, and this time, he didn't look back. Nora didn't speak to anyone the entire ride home. She drove with her window cracked just enough to let the night air slice in, sharp, dry, bitter. Her thoughts wouldn't stop spinning, each one heavier than the last. Caleb's voice, Ellie's fury, the way he wouldn't look back. And underneath it all, Hank, a man who'd told 1,000 half-truths and buried the rest beneath other people's lives. By the time she reached the house, the moon was high and thin. She walked straight to Hank's office and flicked on the lamp. The drawer where he used to keep their joint account folders was empty. She tried the next one, then the file cabinet. She pulled out tax documents, life insurance printouts, old W-2s from companies that no longer existed, but nothing recent, nothing useful. Finally, she pulled his laptop out from under the desk. The password was still the same, Campbell 1959. A half-beat of bitterness twisted in her gut. Of course, same man, same routine, same locked box of a life. She clicked through the folders, bank statements, multiple accounts, transfers, holdings. Her eyes caught on something strange, one recurring entry across multiple statements. Large sums, moved monthly, then consolidated into an entity she didn't recognize, Black Elm Family Foundation. She opened the most recent statement. Every account in Hank's name, retirement, investments, savings, had been zeroed out 3 months before his death. All of it moved. She clicked deeper. Found a board of directors list. Henry Campbell, Ellie Moss, Caleb DeWitt. No mention of Nora Campbell. Not even once. Her stomach twisted. Her own husband had built an entire foundation behind her back and tied her name to none of it. She stormed into Joel's office just after 9 the next morning. He looked up from his desk, startled. Nora. He rewrote the will, she snapped, slamming the laptop down in front of him. Joel blinked. What am I looking at? Transfers. A foundation I didn't know existed. My name's nowhere on it. Ellie and Caleb are listed as board members. He funneled everything into it before he died. Joel leaned in, scrolling through the transactions. His expression darkened. This was clean, structured, intentional. She folded her arms. And illegal, if he was trying to bypass me entirely. Joel paused. Not if he did it while fully competent. But there's more, isn't there? She pressed. He hesitated, then opened a drawer and pulled out another folder. Thin, just a few sheets. I didn't show you this earlier because it wasn't signed. He placed it on the desk. The top page read, Last Will and Testament of Henry James Campbell. Draft revision January 12th. Nora's eyes scanned the lines. It left everything. Every account, every asset, the house, even the farm, to her. Not Ellie, not Caleb. No mention of a foundation. She looked up, stunned. Why didn't he sign it? I don't know, Joel admitted. Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe someone stopped him. All I know is, legally, the version we filed is the only enforceable one. This is just a ghost. Nora stared at the draft. Her hands clenched into fists. So he wanted to give it all to me, and then he didn't. Joel leaned back. It's enough to raise questions, not enough to win a dispute. You'd need leverage, documentation, testimony. I'll get it. A knock came at the office door. Joel turned. Come in. The woman who entered wore scuffed boots, a dark blazer, and a leather satchel that had seen decades of mileage. Her presence filled the room before she even spoke. Nora Campbell? She asked. Yes. She extended her hand. Deborah Prince, private investigator. Joel told me you might need a very specific kind of help. Nora shook her hand, firm. I need to prove Hank was manipulated. Deborah smiled, sharp and knowing. Then we start with the money trail, and we burn it backward. Nora sat down again. But not like before, not grieving, not searching. Ready, cold, focused. I want Ellie's name off everything. I want my name back on it. Deborah tilted her head. What about the boy? Nora's eyes didn't flinch. He doesn't even know who he is yet. Deborah gave a low whistle and pulled a notepad from her coat. Now that's a client I can work with. She clicked her pen. Let's go hunting. Deborah didn't waste time. She set up shop at Nora's kitchen table like she'd lived there for years, spreading manila folders across the surface, tapping away at a beat-up laptop with keys that stuck slightly, and scribbling shorthand notes on yellow legal pads. She didn't drink coffee. She drank hot water with lemon and cursed under her breath every time she hit a firewall. But within 36 hours, she found it. Bingo, she muttered, sliding the screen toward Nora. Nora leaned in. On the monitor was a scanned document, dated, notarized, and watermarked. The Black Elm Family Foundation Articles of Incorporation. Deborah tapped the signature line. That's Ellie's handwriting. She forged Hank's signature. Nora frowned. You're sure? Positive. I've seen over a dozen of his signed forms by now. Medical records, tax documents, insurance renewals. His handwriting's deliberate, sharp angles, always leans left. This thing? It's rounder. Lazy. She tried to mimic it, but she's sloppy. She clicked to another page. This one's better, she said. Original bylaws. Dated 6 months before Hank's death. Names Ellie as acting chair, Caleb as co-trustee. Problem is, she zoomed in. Caleb was a minor at the time. Nora blinked. He was 19. Still legally underage for this kind of designation under Kentucky law, unless emancipated. Which he wasn't. No paperwork, no petition. So, even if Hank had agreed, which I don't believe he did, Caleb couldn't legally serve. Nora sat back in her chair. So Ellie set the whole thing up, without Hank, or with him confused. Either way, she lied. She didn't just lie, Deborah said. She committed fraud. The foundation structure is invalid. If we move fast, we can have it frozen under a probate injunction and start unwinding the money. Nora's hands tightened around her coffee mug. Let's do it. By the end of the week, Joel had filed the petition. Deborah attached 3 affidavits, bank records, handwriting analyses, and a copy of the unsigned will as circumstantial intent. But it didn't stay quiet for long. Late Sunday morning, Nora opened her screen door to find Ellie leaning on the porch railing like she had every right to be there. No diner uniform today, just jeans, boots, and the kind of smug stillness that only came from knowing you were almost untouchable. "Thought you'd come by with another tantrum," Nora said, crossing her arms. Ellie smirked. "I figured I'd save you the drive. You've stirred up enough noise." "Then maybe you should have picked quieter crimes." Ellie stepped forward. "You want to rip up a foundation that pays for his prescriptions, his food, his roof. You want to make him watch it all fall apart. That's what this is about now?" "You forged legal documents?" Nora snapped. "You exploited a dying man, and you used a boy who didn't even know half the story." Ellie's face went flat. "You don't know what Hank wanted." "I know what he was trying to fix," Nora said. "He drafted a new will and didn't get to sign it. He tried to give me back what you helped take." Ellie scoffed. "That unsigned paper? It won't hold up. You think you can scare me out of this? You'll lose, Nora. You're weak. Always have been." Nora stepped closer. "Then why are you here? If I'm so weak, why show up like a cornered animal?" Ellie didn't answer. Her mouth pressed into a tight line. Nora lowered her voice. "You're going to lose. Maybe not tomorrow, but it's coming. I'll take this to court, to the press, to the state if I have to. I'll drag every dollar you touched into the light." Ellie turned sharply to leave, but not fast enough. Deborah's voice rang out from the side of the house. "Well," she said, emerging from behind the porch swing. "That was fun." Ellie froze. "I love when people confess in broad daylight," Deborah added. "Saves me the trouble of hidden mics." Ellie's eyes widened for just a second. Then she turned and stalked down the steps without another word. Deborah stepped up beside Nora, grinning. "We just poked the bear," she said. "Now let's watch her run." Nora didn't smile. Not yet. Instead, she stared across the yard, toward the quiet country road beyond the trees. She won't go far. The Fayette County Courthouse stood like a slab of limestone judgment against the gray morning sky. It wasn't grand, just a squat, bureaucratic building with metal detectors and drop ceilings. But to Nora, it felt like a battlefield. She arrived 10 minutes early, pressed slacks, navy blazer. No jewelry except her wedding ring, now worn on a chain around her neck. Not as a sign of mourning anymore, but as evidence. She climbed the courthouse steps alone. Inside, Joel was waiting. Fresh-shaved pinstripe suit, legal pad tucked beneath one arm. He stood as she approached, but didn't say a word. Just gave her a nod. They both knew what this was. "Ellie?" Nora asked. "Already inside." Nora didn't flinch. Courtroom 2B was smaller than she expected. Low ceilings, beige carpet, a faint scent of cleaning fluid and stale air. A clerk shuffled papers at the front, the judge's bench empty for now. Ellie sat 2 rows ahead, dressed in black. Tasteful blouse, a modest necklace Nora had never seen before. Her hair was pinned, her expression etched with soft grief. Like she was auditioning for sympathy. Nora walked past her without a glance. Joel leaned in. "No, Caleb." Nora didn't answer. She hadn't expected him to come, not after how their last conversation ended. Not after Ellie had slithered back into his ear. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Harwood entered, late 50s, no nonsense, glasses halfway down his nose. His tone was dry but sharp. "This is the matter of In Re, estate of Henry James Campbell. Contestant, Nora Campbell. Respondents, Black Elm Family Foundation." Joel stood first, He moved with the quiet confidence of a man holding live ammunition. Your Honor, we're here today not to resolve, but to halt. We have substantial reason to believe that the current distribution of Mr. Campbell's estate is not only flawed, but fraudulent. Ellie shifted in her seat. Crossing her legs carefully, Joel continued. In support of this, we've submitted a draft will dated January 12th. Unsigned, yes, but created under full mental capacity. This document leaves all assets to Mrs. Nora Campbell, legally and publicly recognized as the decedent's spouse. He passed a copy to the clerk. Additionally, we've submitted evidence that the controlling foundation, Black Elm, was constructed with forged signatures using a structure that is, by law, invalid. One named trustee was a minor at the time, and legal protocol was not followed in its formation. Ellie stood before Joel could sit down. Your Honor, she said, voice carefully modulated. I cared for Henry in the final years of his life. He was confused near the end. He didn't want litigation. He wanted security. The foundation exists because he asked for it. He made sure Caleb and I would be protected. She turned, letting her voice catch ever so slightly. He didn't want his wife to have to carry the burden. Nora almost laughed, but didn't. Joel stood again. We've also submitted a DNA test proving Caleb DeWitt is Mr. Campbell's biological child. However, no legal guardianship, adoption, or dependent status was ever filed. There is no will naming him as beneficiary. There is no trust with his name. Only Ellie Moss's. The courtroom went still. Judge Harwood adjusted his glasses, then flipped through the folder in front of him. This court takes estate manipulation seriously, he said, especially when a caregiver is involved. He looked at Ellie over the rim of his glasses. You'd be surprised how often grief walks hand in hand with motive. He tapped the unsigned will. This will requires validation. The foundation requires review. And this court will not allow disbursement until both have been thoroughly investigated. He turned to the clerk. All probate activity is to pause immediately. No transfers, no withdrawals, no alterations to the estate or foundation assets until further notice. Gavel. Sharp. Final. Court is adjourned. Ellie didn't move. Nora stood slowly. She didn't look at Ellie, not yet. Joel gathered his papers, breath leaving him in a soft whoosh. That's as good as we could have hoped for. Nora walked out of the courtroom in silence. The hallway buzzed faintly with the noise of other cases, other families unraveling behind closed doors. She passed the elevators, headed straight for the stairs. At the landing window, she paused. Outside, parked across the street, was the blue pickup. Caleb. He hadn't come inside. But he had come, and he was watching. The gravel crunched behind her before she ever heard the door open. Nora sat on the porch steps of the farmhouse, shoulders hunched, elbows on her knees. The wood was sun-bleached and still warm beneath her despite the early evening breeze. A late summer storm threatened in the clouds above, but for now, everything held still, waiting. She didn't turn around when the footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I saw you leave court, Caleb said quietly. His voice didn't carry the bite it had before. No anger, no edge, just fatigue. She nodded. I saw you parked across the street. He hesitated. Didn't want to go in. Didn't expect you to. More silence. Then she felt him move. A shuffle, a hand in a pocket. I found this yesterday, he said, finally stepping beside her. It was under the floorboards, loose panel under the bed. He held something out. An envelope, yellowed, creased. No address, no seal. Just her name, Nora, written in the distinct blocky letters of a man who never knew how to be emotional without being efficient. She took it with both hands. Thanks, she said. Caleb nodded once, then dropped down beside her on the steps, leaving a good 2 feet of space between them. He didn't speak. Nora unfolded the paper slowly. The handwriting was undeniably Hank's. Imperfect, compressed, slanted a little to the left like it always had. Nora, if I go before I can tell you, I need you to know one thing. I was wrong. Wrong to hide him. Wrong to lie to you, thinking it would keep you with me. He's my son. And I didn't know what to do with that. With the guilt. With the timing. With how much of a coward I'd become. I didn't want to lose you. So I lied to keep you. And I don't know if that was love or fear or just me failing again. But Caleb is good. He's better than I ever was. I hope someday you'll see that. Hank. She read it once. Then again. The third time. Her hands started to tremble. She folded the letter neatly, carefully, and rested it on her lap. I didn't want any of this, Caleb said, voice low. She turned to look at him. His posture was guarded, arms resting on his knees, fingers interlaced, like he was bracing for a blow. Neither did I, she said softly. But here we are. He didn't respond, but his shoulders eased by a fraction. For a while they just sat there, watching the field breathe under the dimming sky. Cicadas droned in the trees. A bird flitted across the fence line. Somewhere in the barn, something metal clanked. A wind shift or a memory moving on its own. Nora looked out across the land Hank had hidden from her for decades. The broken fence, the grazing patch overgrown with weeds, the shed door hanging slightly open. It was hers now. Not because he gave it to her, but because she took it back. She glanced at Caleb. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, far away and unreadable. I don't know what happens next, she said finally. Me neither, he admitted. She didn't offer a plan, or forgiveness, or comfort. She just sat beside him as the wind picked up and the first drops of rain kissed the edge of the porch. It wasn't peace. Not yet. But it wasn't war either. And for now, that was enough. Nora didn't want attention, but by Monday morning her name was in 3 newspapers, a local TV segment, and a regional podcast titled Bluegrass Justice. All because of a carefully written, legally vetted, quietly loaded statement released by Joel Brennan's office just after dawn. Nora Campbell, legal spouse of the late Henry James Campbell, is pursuing rightful estate correction after discovering significant financial misconduct involving the Black Elm Family Foundation. Supporting documentation includes a previously unknown draft will, a paternity test, and evidence of forged legal documents submitted after Mr. Campbell's death. Mrs. Campbell's goal is not retribution, but restoration. Joel called it measured. Deborah called it surgical. But Nora knew what it really was. A match. Lit slowly. Let loose in a room filled with dry kindling. By Tuesday, the whispers turned. Ellie had worked at Lou's for over a decade, pouring coffee with a smile, sliding biscuits onto plates with motherly efficiency. But now, the regulars leaned in when she passed. A couple left exact change without looking her in the eye. Someone posted a photo of her wiping down a table with the caption, "Didn't take her long to cash in on Hank's ghost." Ellie didn't respond online. She never had a digital footprint worth tracking, but Caleb noticed, and he didn't like what he saw. He stood at the edge of the auto shop lot that Thursday morning, phone in hand, scrolling through old texts from Ellie. Messages that used to feel like family, urgent, close, protective. But now every "don't tell her," every "this isn't her place," every line about Hank being theirs, landed like weight on a scale that had already tipped. He opened his contacts, tapped Ellie's name, and hit delete. No warning, no message, no second thoughts. Just silence. Long overdue. Nora stood at the county records office later that afternoon. The clerk behind the counter had purple reading glasses and a permanent squint. She pushed the file forward with a small smile. Signed, sealed, and recorded. The deed to Black Elm Road now reflects sole ownership under Nora W. Campbell. Nora looked down at the document, the thick black stamp in the corner. It was official. She had spent decades being told to stay away, to ignore her instincts, to trust a man who had worn devotion like armor while building another life in shadows. Now the farm, and all of its buried truths, was hers. That night, Nora sat at the same desk where Hank had once penned grocery lists and secrets. The house was quiet. Caleb had gone back to his small apartment above the shop, promising to return on Sunday for fencing work. She took out her phone, opened the camera. She placed two things on the desk: the letter Hank wrote her, and her wedding ring. She laid the ring gently over the last line, "I hope someday you'll see that," and took the photo. Then she uploaded it. No caption, no explanation, just the image. Within hours, it spread, shared, commented on, downloaded and posted again by local reporters, estate law forums, a grief group in Lexington that reposted it with the words, "Truth doesn't erase the past, but it draws a line in the dirt." Friday morning, Joel walked into her kitchen with a fresh filing. "Request for full estate redirection," he said. "We've got the judge's ear. The court is leaning sympathetic, especially after the press. If this clears—" Nora raised an eyebrow. "If?" He smiled. "When, I think." She took the file, didn't open it. She looked out the window instead, where a pair of crows were circling the broken fence line out back. The porch swing moved slightly in the wind. The house didn't feel haunted anymore, just unlocked. Free. "I don't want to destroy what Hank built," she said quietly. Joel hesitated. "Then what do you want?" She turned to him, no hesitation in her voice. "I want to build something honest out of what he buried." Joel opened his mouth to speak, but just then, Nora's phone buzzed. A message. From Caleb. "Can we talk?" The bank wasn't in town, it was in Louisville. A quiet, discreet financial office on the third floor of a building Nora would have never looked twice at. Gray carpet, frosted glass, quiet jazz humming faintly through the overhead speakers. No signage, no branding, just a gold plaque near the front desk that read, "Barclay and Westland Private Wealth Management." Deborah stepped out of the meeting room first, a thin folder in one hand, her expression unreadable. Nora rose slowly. "Well?" Deborah gave a small nod and handed over the file. "You ready to have your head spun?" Inside the folder, printed in crisp black ink, was the name, Nora W. Monroe Trust, established 2005. Nora blinked. "Monroe?" "Your maiden name," Deborah said, slipping her hands into her coat pockets. "You haven't used it in over 30 years. Which made it the perfect place for him to hide something. Nora flipped through the account summary. The total was precise. $712,186.37. Not a single withdrawal, not even a transfer. It had just sat there, growing, waiting. "He's had this open for 20 years? Nora asked. Deborah nodded. "Started it the same year he bought the farm." Nora sank back into the leather chair. Her pulse ticked in her ears. "So he kept money hidden, in my name." "Not hidden from you," Deborah said gently. "Hidden for you. My guess? This was the backup plan, the one he was too much of a coward to explain. He left you the foundation crumbs and tried to bury the truth in silence." She leaned in, her voice low. "This was always meant for you." The funds cleared by Tuesday afternoon. Nora wired half to cover legal fees, Joel's, the investigators, and a large retainer for the probate litigation still pending. No hesitation, no apology, just precision. The other half she split. Some went into restoring the farm's fencing, repairing the barn roof, and hiring a local contractor to inspect the house's foundation. The rest? She opened an education fund, under one name, Caleb M. DeWitt. She didn't tell him right away. She just filed the paperwork, set up the transfer instructions, and quietly attached a letter that read, "Whatever you do next, do it for you. No strings, no debts, just a second chance." That week, Ellie Moss disappeared from town. Lou's Diner posted a staffing update on Facebook and closed early for 3 straight days. No official statement, no answers. But the whisper mill churned. People said she'd skipped town after being questioned about financial irregularities. Others swore she was headed to Florida to take care of her sick sister, though no one had ever heard of this sister before. Deborah simply smiled when the news reached her. Guilty people always pack light. Saturday came heavy with cloud cover and a quiet wind. Caleb arrived late afternoon, driving slow, windows down. No music, no sunglasses, just him. He parked beside the barn and walked up to the porch where Nora was waiting, 2 mugs of coffee already poured. He didn't take one. Instead, he stood there, hands at his sides, eyes darker than usual. "She's gone," he said. Nora nodded once. "I heard." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. And then the mask cracked. "I don't know who I'm supposed to be now," he whispered. Nora stepped forward, reaching out. She didn't touch him, just stood close enough for him to feel the offer. "I don't either," she said. "But maybe we start there." His eyes filled, not fast, slow and resistant, like they weren't sure if they were allowed to. He sat down on the porch steps, then put his head in his hands, and cried. Not loud, not for long, but real. The kind of grief that came not just from loss, but from all the things he never got to know, never got to ask, never got to hear from the man whose blood ran through his own. "I never got to know him," Caleb said, wiping his face. Nora sat beside him. "Neither did I." They watched the sky together. The horizon pressing low with the promise of rain. The fields were still, the fences mended. For once, the farmhouse didn't feel like a relic. It felt like a beginning. The barn doors opened with a groan, freshly oiled but still stubborn in the corners. Morning sunlight spilled into the dust and sawdust air as Nora stepped inside, clipboard in hand, boots muddy to the ankle. 5 boys stood in a loose circle near the stalls, each holding a shovel or feed bucket, wide-eyed and uncertain. She smiled at them. Not sweet, not patronizing, just steady. "This place isn't about healing you," she said. "It's about showing you how to heal yourselves." Caleb stepped in behind her, a bandana wrapped around his wrist, dirt smudged across his forearm. He offered each kid a nod, then pointed toward the paddock. "First up, muck stalls. If you can't respect a space, you can't respect yourself." The youngest boy, maybe 12, groaned under his breath. Caleb didn't flinch. "You'll thank me when your boots stop sinking." And with that, the day began. The ranch didn't have a name yet, just a signpost with chipped white paint and a temporary wooden plaque that read Campbell Farm in faded blue stencils. But word spread faster than she expected. Joel had quietly reached out to a state social worker. Deborah had sent an email to a retired Army counselor she once worked with. By mid-spring, Nora had a waiting list. No therapy degrees, no grants, just land. Quiet. A rhythm. Fences to mend, animals to feed, breath to be caught. It was more than enough. The Lexington Ledger ran a Sunday feature in late April. From widow to warrior, how one Kentucky woman reclaimed a life buried beneath secrets. It was respectful, sharp, not syrupy. A photo sat at the top. Nora in the barn doorway, arms crossed, sun in her hair. Caleb in the background, half smiling, one boot on a bale of hay. They didn't pose it. The journalist had just caught it. By Monday morning, Nora had 3 voicemails from local press, one from a podcast in Nashville, and a handwritten letter from a widow in Indiana who said simply, "You reminded me that grief doesn't have to end with a door slamming. Sometimes it starts with one opening." Joel showed up with the frame 2 weeks later. She found him standing awkwardly in the kitchen, paper bag in one hand, rolled sleeves, a familiar grin tucked into his cheek. "Thought you might want this somewhere permanent," he said, holding it out. Inside the mahogany frame, the final property title, signed, stamped. Filed, Nora W. Campbell, sole owner. Below it, in smaller font, Black Elm Foundation, dissolved. She stared at it for a long time, then set it on the mantel. "Thank you," she said. Joel looked around the room, the fresh paint, the quiet, the newness that felt earned, not bought. "You know," he said, "I've read a lot of wills. Never seen one rewritten in real time quite like this." She smiled, but didn't answer. Deborah came by the following Friday. She didn't knock, just appeared in the field beside the fence where Nora was overseeing a new load of hay. "No clipboards?" Nora teased. Deborah tipped her head toward the house. "I left it on your porch, with my final invoice." "Retiring? Already did." She smirked. "But I wanted to see it for myself. You know, the after. Not everyone makes it here." Nora looked out across the land, green, humming, alive again. "You ever think revenge could look like this?" she asked. Deborah squinted toward the barn where Caleb was laughing with one of the boys. "I've seen women burn their lives down for less," she said. "But you? You took the match and built a house out of it." That night, the porch light hummed above their heads as Nora settled into the swing. Caleb sat beside her, holding a beer he hadn't touched. They watched the wind stir the trees, the horses shift in the pasture. He cleared his throat once, twice, then said, soft enough she almost didn't hear it, "Thanks, Mom." She didn't move, didn't look at him, just reached over, rested her hand on his. No squeeze, no fanfare, just 2 hands. Stilled, steady. A line drawn not in blood or grief or inheritance, but in choice. In the legacy they refused to let anyone else define. The dew still clung to the tall grass as Nora stepped out onto the porch. Dawn hadn't quite broken, just a soft pale smear at the horizon, hinting at the day to come. The air smelled of damp earth, hay, and something clean, like beginning again. She wrapped a sweater around her shoulders and walked slowly down the steps. Her boots found the path out toward the pasture, gravel crunching softly beneath her heels. The horses were already awake, 3 of them, grazing lazily under the split fence line, steam rising from their flanks. One lifted its head when she approached, blinking in her direction like it knew her. She reached out a hand, touched the velvet of its nose. "Morning," she whispered. It blinked again, then returned to its feed. She turned, eyes drifting to the edge of the road. The sign was new. Hung just the night before by Caleb and one of the older boys, both of them cursing softly in the dark as they leveled the posts. "The Campbell Ranch, second chances start here." The wood was dark-stained cedar, the letters hand-carved. It looked like it had always belonged there. Nora smiled, just a little. Caleb rode out a little after 6. She spotted him in the rear field, astride the bay gelding they'd rescued from a closed stable last month. His form wasn't polished. He still leaned too far forward and had a habit of gripping the reins like they'd bite, but he looked comfortable, like someone who didn't need to pretend anymore. He waved once when he saw her, then turned the horse toward the east fence line, the sunrise breaking orange and full behind him. She didn't call out, just let him ride. There was something sacred about this hour. Joel pulled in around 8. He brought bagels and the final stack of papers in a weathered manila envelope. He found her in the barn office, going over vet records. "It's official," he said, setting the bag down first, then the file. "All disbursements cleared. Estate is closed. Every asset has been reclassified under your name or the ranch's operating trust." Nora reached for the file but didn't open it. Instead, she looked out the window where two boys were brushing down a mule that had wandered in off the interstate 6 weeks ago and never left. "Feels strange," she said, "not having anything left to fight." Joel nodded. "You earned strange." He hesitated, then added more softly, "There's no statute for this, you know. No rulebook. Just you, choosing what comes next." She smiled without showing teeth. "Then I choose breakfast." He laughed, cracked open the bagels, and left her with the file. Later that afternoon, Nora wandered into the old feed shed, the place Hank used to lock when she visited the property all those years ago. The rusted padlock was gone, the hinges oiled. Inside, dust floated in the sunlight like suspended breath. There was nothing dramatic. No secret ledger. No hidden journal. Just a few old tools. A pair of gloves. And a photo. Water damaged at the corners, clipped to the edge of the workbench. It showed Hank, younger, maybe 40, with one arm around a child barely walking. Caleb, she realized. Before anything else had happened. The expression on Hank's face was raw, unposed. His eyes had a softness she'd forgotten they could hold. She reached for the photo but didn't take it. Instead, she closed her eyes and whispered what she hadn't said until now. "Thank you. For what you left. And for what you didn't take with you. No forgiveness. No permission. Just release." That night, the porch lights glowed warm against the siding. Inside, the boys laughed over dinner. Caleb and two of the younger ones trading stories about busted boots and barn cats. The sound carried through the window like music. Nora sat on the porch swing, legs tucked beneath her. She didn't look at the stars, didn't need to. The house no longer felt like a lie. It felt lived in. True. She reached up, touched the necklace that still held her wedding ring, then let it rest gently against her chest. Not a shackle now. Just a thread in the story. The screen door creaked open behind her. Caleb stepped out, plate in one hand. "There's still peach cobbler if you want some." She smiled up at him. "Maybe later." He nodded, lingered for a moment, then went back inside. The wind moved across the fields like breath. Steady, grounded, full of roots. And as the porch settled beneath her, the land silent and open and hers at last, Nora whispered to the dark, "He never let me come here. Now I never have to leave."